So our topic is Windows Azure. I think one of the first questions that people might wonder about is, why develop in the Azure platform? I mean, in many ways, Amazon has become the big dog to beat. They also have a platform as a service offering, Beanstalk, whereas Azure is very strong with their PaaS offering. But given that Amazon has become such a default choice for so many companies, why develop in the Windows Azure platform? Adam, what's your sense of that?
Well, so I know where my bread is buttered. So from my perspective, right, I work for Microsoft, and certainly
right.
I would get you to go with Azure. But I also have been a Microsoft developer for a long time, and I think one of the natural plays for Microsoft developers certainly is to go to Azure as a platform as a service story. If you're comfortable with the .NET stack and that's where you are, certainly Azure has been one of those big players, I think, for quite a while. Some pretty cool offerings right off the bat with the blob storage and the table storage and things that allow you to really build some greenfield applications pretty quickly. I think that's a pretty compelling platform as a service story, certainly from Microsoft, around those sort of greenfield applications. And then for more brownfield, lift and shift kind of applications, I think that our IaaS offerings stand up quite admirably against the Amazon Web Services space as well. So, and maybe Eric or Greg could give some real world experience with that as well.
Eric, why don't you chime in? What's your sense of that? Why do you prefer Azure?
Yeah, so I think like Adam was saying, that developer story for a Microsoft developer is just it makes a whole lot of sense. Like the integration with Visual Studio, the integration with the tools that I'm used to, just that familiarity makes a lot of sense for me if I'm a Microsoft developer. But even if I'm not a Microsoft developer, right now I can run Linux out in Windows Azure. I could run basically any VHD, anything I could stuff in a VHD format, I could run out in Windows Azure. So, I can run Windows servers just like I would expect, but multiple flavors of Linux, all sorts of stuff. And so, there really isn't a lot of boundary today around Azure of what you can and can't do. There are a couple of limitations, but overall, I could run my Rails and my Ruby apps. I could run Node.js, or I could do the traditional ASP.NET sort of web apps.
And, speaking of Linux, it reminds me, Greg, that you and I had talked about this. You coming up in your college years in the 90s, and a lot of the young developers at that point, saw Microsoft as kind of that it was fashionable to diss Microsoft, and here you are, you were an open source Linux guy, and here you're very much an Azure developer. What happened there to make that shift for you?
So, yeah, as part of an intro, I'm actually a Microsoft MVP under client development, and so I'm doing a lot of work on that front. And to address the question specifically, like why did I make that move?
Right.
Well, when it comes down to the last 4 or 5 years with Microsoft, they've really gone strong on an open source movement with a lot of their development technologies, from MVC for their web development, Entity Framework. They've got new additions like SignalR, where they're promoting that kind of additional stuff within, and then they're also fully adopting other parties' open source movement stuff, like they now include jQuery and Modernizer and standard web stack development. And where I see Azure really coming into play from the developing client-side apps, it's for either desktop or for mobile devices, is really having that back-end processing power, and it doesn't limit me to only Microsoft client devices. I can use data storage there. I can use they make it really easy with Azure Mobile Services for push notifications. That's a big win because all 4 of the major mobile providers have different notification systems, and this kind of makes it in one place for us.
Android, iOS.
Yeah, Windows Phone and Windows Store actually have 2 separate ones as well. They're unified there. And so how I made that transition was, I started seeing Microsoft make that cultural shift, and so I kind of went along for the ride, and I like where it's moving. So.